David's here tonight to talk to us about estimates. Please give him a really warm welcome.
So I want to talk about estimates and whether they make us safer. And just before we start, as a matter of interest, how many of you use some kind of estimating practice in your work? Has anybody made a conscious decision not to estimate? A couple of people maybe. Okay, interesting. So I think this is probably going to be quite relevant to most of the room, but we'll see how it goes. So the title of the talk is "Do Estimates Make Us Safer?" But at some point during writing it, I kind of added this asterisk here, and I kind of, while I was writing this talk, what I started out trying to do was explore the idea that estimates are a safety feature in a lot of agile software development practices, and the idea is that they protect us from overcommitting or promising things that can't happen or all those kind of things. But that's kind of with the focus on the development team. And then while I was writing it, I realized that really what I was talking about was whether estimates make software development safer for the wider organization outside the development team. And so really what the talk is about, how organizations can engage with their team's estimates in a more healthy way and not come unstuck, basically. So before I get going, I've got a sort of couple of disclaimers to give. The first is that this talk is really heavily rooted in personal experience, so I don't apologise for that, but I'm going to apologise for it a little bit now. Your experiences may be completely different, and you may think I'm wrong about everything, and that's fine. Do a talk, I don't know, ask a question. Second disclaimer is that I've not cracked it. I'm not about to give you a magic solution to all your estimating problems and all your problems with predicting the future in your organisation, because it's hard. And if I set out to do that, I would fail anyway. I'm just going to talk about some stuff that I hope might help. And the final one is, I'm not really sure if we should be estimating. I am beginning to feel estimates might do more harm than good in the long run. However, I use estimates in my day-to-day life as a product owner at Equiniti Credit Services, and I think maybe moving to a place where we weren't using estimates and would require more sort of organisational maturity than we have available to us right now. So the first thing I want to look at quickly is, what do I mean by do estimates make us safer? What is safety in this context? Well, safety, we normally mean something that stops bad things happening. So a good example of a safety feature that is probably quite familiar to us from day-to-day life are car headlights. Like, cars have headlights, so you can see the car coming, and then hopefully there won't be an accident because of that. Or we have safety features that make bad things less bad. So cars have seat belts, because if a car comes around the corner without its headlights on, then the seat belt might save your life, hopefully. And the same concept kind of applies in software development. So principally, teams estimate so they can manage the level of commitment they've got. So normally a team doing some kind of agile methodology would estimate some work, so they could work out how much work to commit to within their next sprint or iteration and make sure that's not too much work. But I think estimates should also protect the wider organization that team works in. And like, the ways that they might do that, I think they should avoid unrealistic dates, because they've gone off and assumed the team can do a load more work than they can do. Similar to that, they should avoid running out of money, because the team might, well, sort of same thing really, like, how much time do we need to invest in this to make it work? And they should help us to check assumptions we've made. So once again, the concept of like the size of the work comes into that, but also we should take that as an opportunity to check some other assumptions we've got maybe without thinking about in committing to a piece of work. They make us think about value at their best. When you see how much something costs, you start thinking about what it's worth, and hopefully that's a conversation estimates can force. And also they kind of protect us from a breakdown of trust, which is really poisonous in an organisation. because no one's going to get accused of not working hard enough if something is taking a long time to deliver, if they gave fair warning that it was going to take a long time to deliver. However, actually, I think some of these benefits aren't realised in organisations, as I've seen, because estimates get misused, or people don't engage with estimates in a healthy way. So looking at this concept of safety features getting misused, if we go back to our car, we've got like another example of Tesla's autopilot feature, often in the news because people crash their cars while using autopilot because they've gone to sleep, or they're watching TV, or they're just doing something else. Now, autopilot should really be a great safety feature for a car, because normally in road accidents, like, human error is a big factor, and it should kind of get rid of that element, or at least mitigate it. But if you over rely in the safety feature to do more than it was really designed to do and take your eyes off the road, you can end up in more danger. And we see similar things happening with how organisations consume the estimates their development teams provide. Estimates are dangerous, and we need to be careful with them. I guess I'll come back in more detail to some of the ways in which estimates get misused and organisations get ahead of themselves and put themselves in danger with them. But it really comes down to that optimism, like, okay, we've got an estimate, that means we can predict the future. We can't. No one can predict the future. If you are part of a team that estimates, or you work in an organisation where teams estimate, you need to be quite careful with those estimates. Like, they are around there, they're out in the world probably, and people probably doing unwarranted things with them around you. And what I'd like to encourage you all to do is just be a bit careful and try to avoid stumbling into any one of a number of pitfalls I'm going to talk about with those estimates, and really get the value of those estimates in terms of protecting the organisation from bad things happening. Okay, I said this is based on personal experience, and when I talk about estimates, I just want to explain the estimating practice that the teams I've worked with have most commonly used. They estimate in story points. It's a modified Fibonacci sequence. I think probably everyone will have seen something like it. And they generally use planning poker or silent grouping as a technique to agree on estimates for pieces of work. Crucially, work often gets re-estimated over time, which I think is kind of natural. Like, the closer we get to doing a piece of work, the more we know about it, the better able we are to estimate it, and the more important it becomes to know how big it is, so we can try and work out how we're going to tackle it. And finally, the final bit of our estimating practice is we have a velocity, which is based on an average number of story points of work completed per sprint, which we use to predict what our capacity is going to be, essentially. So the first major pitfall I want to talk about is when stuff's too big to estimate. And what I mean by that is I find that every estimating practice works well within a range. So like any kind of instrument you use for measuring stuff, you'll find some things are too small for it and some things are too big for it. If you take a 30 centimetre ruler and try to measure something that's shorter than a millimetre with it, you probably won't get a good reading. If you try and measure something that is the length of this room with it, you also probably won't get a good reading. It's the wrong measuring tool for the job. And it's the same with estimating practices, really. I'm not sure if there's really a good guideline for when something is too big for you to estimate using your estimating practice that you have, other than that if we assume that most teams are probably estimating work with a view to delivering it in 1 or 2 week iterations, that anything where the size of it would take months is probably too big to really sensibly talk about using that estimating approach. What actually happens though is organisations insist on having a comparable estimate for everything, because then they can kind of put it all in a spreadsheet probably and sort of rank things and weight them against each other. But really, we're not comparing apples and apples here. So it's never really comparable, no matter how comparable it looks. So how does that damage us? Well, the estimate takes a really long time to do for a start, because either you go and try and estimate it and everyone says, yeah, it's really big, it's 1,000 story points, which is actually quite sensible. And everyone says, we can't put that in the spreadsheet and decide what to do, because it's then not comparable to the things that are a smaller number of story points. So you spend a lot of time breaking it down that you could spend actually delivering something that's a higher priority anyway. and you come up with this estimate, which is probably still wrong. And then you take that estimate and you make a stupid decision, like, yeah, let's do it. We know exactly how long it's going to take now, and you come unstuck. Well, in my experience, actually the very first thing to do is go back to that initial estimate where someone says it's about 1,000 story points. That is about as reasonable an estimate as you're probably going to get if you try and approach it in that way. That's not to say we can go and make a decision whether to commit to that piece of work off the back of that estimate. It's to say that actually we don't have an estimate that we can make that decision based on at all, and we can't plan this work like we plan normal work because it's too big and too unknown. So it's really about embracing that uncertainty, embracing difficult conversations with clients and stakeholders who really want to know when they can have it. And maybe something that I would like to try, because I've read about it recently but haven't had a chance to try, is talking about what our appetite is for this work. So if anyone's read Shape Up recently, one of the things they talk about there is appetite. So it's kind of reframing the estimating question from how long is this going to take to deliver to what is the maximum amount of time we're willing to give this for it still to be worth it for us. Maybe that is a better lens to look at the big things through. Pitfall number 2, the team can't estimate. This is kind of related, but I've seen this quite a lot. I don't know how widespread it is, but you need to estimate a piece of work. So you get the development team in the room and you kind of point at it. You say, how big's that? And they can't answer the question because they don't actually know enough about the piece of work. They don't have the knowledge or the skills in the room to estimate that piece of work. So what then happens is you go and get someone from outside the team to come and sit with the team and tell them how to do the work so they can estimate it, right? What then often happens is the team fails to deliver the work when they thought they would, and everyone gets quite upset, especially the expert who feels that their time was wasted because they tried to help and the team went and failed anyway. Obviously, the elephant in the room here is that the team didn't have the knowledge and the skills it needed to do the work. And if the team can't estimate the work, that is a big kind of red flashing light telling you that this is maybe not a piece of work for this team in its current format. If they can't estimate it, they're probably not going to be able to deliver it. And you need to kind of pay attention to the warning sign. If you have these experts in the organization who can tell them how to do the work, maybe they need to join the team. Like if it's going to be a cross-functional team to do that piece of work, those people are probably in it. Or maybe another team does have the skills to do the work, or maybe no one does, and we should just pick a different piece of work that's more valuable anyway. Pitfall number 3, treating work in progress as done. I've done this a lot. I feel really bad about it, but we're supposed to be all about making work in progress visible, but how many people in this room have actually hidden work in progress before? Just me? A few hands creeping up. Okay, so pretty simple example here with some numbers on it. Team has some work in progress estimated at 30 points. The team's velocity is 20 points per sprint. The assumption is if it's in the sprint backlog, it'll be finished by the end of the sprint. The developers must have known what they were doing when they committed to that. And then at the end of the sprint, it's not done, and everyone gets upset. The first thing I say here, I probably should have put it at the top of the list, is like, you should always trust the development team's intentions. You can trust people in different ways, and even if you doubt their capability to do something, you should always trust that they intend to do a good job, right? So, however, why would we assume this work's going to be completed any faster than the previous work? It might, but if we make a bunch of plans off the back of that, then we're probably going to come unstuck and end up in a situation where we need another sprint to get to a particular goal than we thought we were going to have. So it's just a case of being empirical, paying attention to past trends, and not getting into a fight with the team about commitment and whether they're working hard enough, which is never going to take you anywhere you want to be. Pitfall number 4, ignoring the cycle time. I've seen this quite a lot. In some places, it's probably not an issue at all. However, bear with me. Quick example here. We have a user story that's been estimated at 5 points. The team typically delivers about 10 points per week worth of work. So it should be easily delivered in a week, right? No, because this team's cycle time is 3 weeks, which means that while they complete around 10 points of work per week, everything they do takes at least 3 weeks or around 3 weeks. The only way around that is pay attention to cycle time. It is as important, possibly more important than velocity as a metric to understand about how software development happens in your organization. And certainly in terms of short-term planning, it may have more of an influence over how long things take than the actual size of those things. Pitfall number 5, comparing teams. This is probably a well-established thing that people know is a bad idea, but different teams, different people, different work, even if the estimates look like they're comparable, they're not. They're just different things. You can't compare them. You can't compare estimates. You can't compare velocity. If you do, then you will very quickly destroy trust in your organization and make people unhappy with each other. I don't really know what to do about it. Ask people nicely not to is the best bet there. Try and explain to them why it's a bad idea and why the numbers they're trying to compare aren't really comparable. They might be willing to listen, they might not. The other thing I'd say is that a particular scenario here to be wary of is maybe where you have 2 teams and one team kind of takes a piece of work from their backlog and the other team accepts it into their backlog. At that point, you should probably re-estimate it because the team that originally estimated it are not going to be the people doing the work. So different people, different work, effectively, re-estimate it. And also secondly, if you've got like a shared backlog, it's probably, for multiple teams, it's probably worth those teams re-estimating stuff if they accept something off that shared backlog, which maybe has been estimated by someone else or a sort of estimating council drawn from multiple teams. Pitfall number 6, you've got to be really careful with how you calculate velocity, and here's why. What I've done generally with the teams I've got, as I mentioned earlier, is re-estimate work as we get closer to doing it. And those estimates typically sort of increase over time. And you can kind of see how that happens because, you know, you start out with a high level estimate and then you kind of refine it, the story, and you realize, oh, it's actually a bit bigger than we thought because there's more, I don't know, validation than we thought we were going to need on it. Fine, re-estimate it, goes up a bit. Then you kind of, when you actually start planning that work into a sprint, you might start splitting that story and think, okay, well, this is still quite big, so we're going to split it into 2 separate stories so we can sort of test and release them independently and get some feedback as early as possible. Great, good idea. Split it into 2 stories, estimate them. The total estimate is probably now bigger than the original estimate, and yet again. And then in the course of doing that work, you actually realize there's another story, but it's not really a top priority. So you're going to write it up, estimate it, and stick it on the backlog. And now we have found that the total estimate we have against all that work is bigger than the initial estimate we started out with. That's not a bad thing. If you're looking at the original purpose of estimates, which is helping teams plan a manageable commitment for a short period of time, that's a good idea. Like, the more you know about how big that commitment is, the better a decision you can make, right? However, if that team also calculates a velocity based on the work it completes, that velocity will be based on the final estimate of all that work, which is bigger than the initial estimate. If you then take some other work, which has an initial estimate, and try to predict how long it will take to deliver it based on that velocity, it will take longer because you kind of have this concept of initial estimate and detailed estimate. They're actually different things, and your detailed or final estimates in most teams will be bigger. I think certainly in my team they're about 20% bigger, and I found out about this when the finance department came to me very angrily and asked why my team had universally taken 20% longer to deliver everything than we said we would. And when I looked at it, I said, well, that's ridiculous, because actually we should sort of take exactly the amount we said it would take on average because we use relative estimation, and that was what they were doing wrong. They were taking like the initial estimates and predicting how long it would take to deliver that work based on the final estimates. It's a bit weird. You could argue that really what's happening there is the velocity itself is being misused for something it wasn't designed to do, and I'm kind of inclined to agree, but it also, I've seen it happening in organisations, so you kind of need to get on top of it. Otherwise, people start saying things like, we're bad at estimating, and everyone's going to spend a lot of time trying to get better at estimating, probably without getting any better at estimating, but they're going to feel rubbish in the meantime. So I'd say like engage with the people who use your estimates, including maybe find out who's using your estimates you don't know about. It's always surprising who picks up on these things in an organisation. Make sure they understand what the estimates are telling them, and make sure they're not attempting to read something that isn't there into them. And if you're doing any sort of calculations about capacity yourself, use the right data, be really careful. You need to understand what it is that you're measuring and what sort of statistical methods you're using. Pitfall number 7, there's only 8, and they're done. Ignoring the warning signs. I think this is probably a theme that cuts across all of them, but one of the things that teams often do with estimates is put together a Burndown chart, because that's really good. Right? It's a nice visual way. You can see if you're off track because the line of where you actually got to and the line of where you need to be are kind of diverging a bit, and the line of where you really are is sort of higher than the line of where you need to be to get to a particular goal by a particular date. And then people start saying things like, we need to get back on track. No one ever gets back on track. Like, seriously, unless like there is like a particular thing, like maybe one big story that is like one day from being finished, then maybe you can get back on track, because really it's just the problem with the fidelity of the measurement. But even so, one big story is probably going to take longer to finish than you think, because it's just big. So if people start looking at Burndown charts and saying we need to get back on track, you're kind of missing the point. If you want to deal with that situation, what the estimates are telling you, what the data you have is telling you, is that there's either too much work or not enough time. So you need to embrace the difficult conversations again and find a way to either get more time to get to the goal that you want to get to, or change the goal, like drop some work so you can make sure you stick to that date. You've got to resist the pressure to engage in that talk about getting back on track. I have failed to do that in the past, and obviously we didn't get back on track, and it would have been better for everybody to admit that the dates needed to change at the time, but I was weak, I was young. And also, like, I guess another one here, and this is probably more of one for the Scrum Masters in the room, is if you are off track, there might be a good reason for it. And if you can find and fix it, you might not get back on track, but it might stop you getting any more off track. Like there might be something going wrong in the process or the technology that could actually be addressed that is causing things to take longer than everyone thought. Final pitfall, number 8, endless re-estimating. So after like several months of the other pitfalls in your organization, people are probably going to lose trust in each other in estimates, and that phrase, we're bad at estimating, will start coming out again. And a lot of people respond to that by wanting really detailed estimates of everything a long way ahead, because the problem is we haven't estimated enough, which apparently we're bad at. Okay, and essentially that just takes away a lot of time. So the team then spends a lot of time estimating. The estimates probably don't get any better because we're talking about the future, and they could have spent that time delivering something, which is really the ultimate way of building trust in any kind of software delivery organization. And if you see that, whoever you are, you just got to use whatever leverage you have to protect the team from getting involved in those major detailed upfront estimates. Give them a bit of space to deliver something valuable. Make sure that what they're delivering is valuable, and like discovery and prioritization is a whole area that I'm not going to cover in this talk, but that might be a better area to look at than whether you're good at estimating or not. Final thoughts. So I came up with some like general tips, because I feel like what I did is then there is point out a bunch of bad things, and I wanted to end on a positive message of what we can bear in mind, even when things are going well with estimates, to make sure that we stay in a good place with it. The first one I think is to deeply understand your estimating practice. If you're someone who is a member of a team or a development team, or someone who works closely with that development team, or who is a kind of a customer of them in some way, and you're consuming those estimates, so you're paying attention to them for any purpose, you really need to understand the estimating practice, and that is not just the job for Scrum Masters, I think, or product owners. Everyone should understand what they're doing when they estimate and why and how it works, because then you kind of, as an organization, have this built-in resilience to getting it wrong, basically. Always see estimates in context. If you know how big something is, that is not meaningful on its own. You also need to know where it sits in the backlog. Is it on a roadmap? Like, how quickly does that team typically get through work? There's all this contextual information that will help you to answer the question you really want to know the answer to, which is probably when about should I expect this to be done. Looking at the estimate on its own will probably lead you to making a silly mistake with that. Estimates are supposed to reveal uncomfortable truths, and like pretty much most agile practices, that's really what they're for. You need to embrace the difficult conversations, as I keep saying. Make sure you know what question you're really trying to answer. A lot of requests for estimates, I find when I kind of dig into it, are really trying to answer a different question, which is like, should we even bother with this? Is it worth it? How risky is this? Like, find out what the real question is that the estimate's trying to answer. Number 5, like particularly if, like me, you suspect people out there in your organization are using estimates in a harmful way, find out who's consuming them, what they're doing with them, why, what questions they're trying to answer. There's no substitute for actually speaking to people. Changing the unit won't fix your problems. There have been various times when I thought actually what we need to do is estimate in t-shirt sizes or ideal hours, or we need to change from using a Fibonacci sequence to a sequence of just like doubling every time. So it's like 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, whatever. I wasn't right on any of those occasions. The unit of measurement isn't the problem. It's the wider culture around how estimates are used probably. And the same goes for estimating in more detail. If you estimate things in more detail, particularly if they're big, all you'll find out is probably going to be even bigger than you thought. So just to embrace the fact that it's big. You need to make some decisions about how you handle a piece of big work and whether it's worth it. Always bear in mind whether estimating is more valuable than delivering. And I guess the final thing is like, don't get too hung up on future work. Estimates are talking about future work, but if we're doing the right things in terms of development, discovery, prioritization, and so on, then we should have plenty of value in the existing products. And that was really good timing because that was my last slide. At the end of the day, the work you've already done is always going to be the most valuable work. So try and keep the conversation focused on that.